Sweden is a land rich in forests, from the mountainous regions of the north to the rich flatlands of the south. Seen in its entirety, the country features relatively few yellow belts of open land. This view of reality is tempting, but not really wholly representative. Nevertheless, more than half of Sweden is covered by forest. Our entire lives are filled with the products of forests. The chair I'm sitting in, the cloth in my clothes, these papers here in front of me, houses, diapers, fiberboard ceilings, and so on and so on and so on ad infinitum. And many of the wood products you encounter in your daily lives come from Sweden, a country that has a very large share of the world's trade in forestry products. Naturally, these industries consume vast quantities of lumber. Day and night, deliveries come streaming in, and all of them come from the vast forests of Sweden. Even among the flowery meadows of southernmost Sweden, truck transports loaded with wood are a very common sight. For even here in the south, there are a number of hardwood and pine forests. Nevertheless, of course, the incomparably largest areas of forest are to be found in the more northerly portions of Sweden. There are only relatively few species of trees in Swedish forests. The most important of these are spruce and pine. Among the hardwoods, birch is the most common. With their decorative, romantic white trunks, the birches contribute to the scenic poetry of the countryside. Who could think of this as a raw materials factory? Few of us, anyway, who love spending our leisure in the woods. Sweden is over 900 miles long and lies as far north as between the 55th and the 69th parallels. But thanks to the Gulf Stream, it isn't really so cold here as one might think. But naturally, there are great climatic variations. In the northerly third of Sweden, with its more severe climate, trees grow slowly. And for that reason, it can take 150 years before a stand of timber is ready for final felling. In southern Sweden, however, the climate is mild, and the trees there grow twice as quickly. The tree species are generally the same in north and south. But here in the south, one can also still find beautiful, temple-like beech forests, which have not yet been eliminated by competition with the more profitable spruce. Private individuals own half of Sweden's forests, while public agencies and forest companies own a fourth each. Most of the private forest owners have joined together in forest owner associations, which look after the economic interests of their members and help them to coordinate such things as procurement of equipment and manpower. It is a happy form of cooperation, where the right of personal ownership has been retained undiminished. Sweden's forest industry accounts for about 12% of this country's annual gross national product. Reforestation is accomplished through clear felling. The owner is then required by law to provide for regrowth. Only on dry ground can one put his trust in natural regeneration. In the northern portion of the country, the ground vegetation decomposes so slowly that thick layers of undecayed plant remains accumulate. In order to create a favorable growing environment for the young seedlings, these areas are periodically subjected to controlled burning. The danger of uncontrolled forest fires is not particularly great in Sweden, since the atmospheric humidity is relatively high, and active air patrols are kept in operation during the dangerous periods. These can quickly alert firefighting units. After controlled burning, the ground is readily accessible for planting or seeding. The controlled burning method, however, is becoming obsolete and is giving way to more mechanized preparation of the soil. Planting is still performed manually for the most part, but feverish efforts are underway to develop mechanical methods for it as well. The spacing of the plants has been increased in recent years and is now frequently as much as 7 feet or more. All these cultivation measures demand, of course, great quantities of seeds. Formerly, pine cones were gathered only from cut-down trees, but efforts are now being made to obtain an ever greater amount from special seed orchards. There, grafts from trees having particularly good qualities are allowed to grow and produce cones and seeds under controlled and favorable conditions. The graft is laid on snow and covered with peat moss. Then, sometime in June, it is picked up, fresh and green. Here is how a perfect graft is performed on a mother sapling. After 3 months, the graft is securely attached and the mother sapling's top can be removed. After 1 year, everything else can be removed but the graft itself. Sweden has many modern tree nurseries. In recent years, plastic greenhouses have been tested very successfully. Here, the seedlings can be provided with a controlled and optimal growing environment. Watering takes place automatically, and there are even gas burners in operation to provide carbon dioxide.
This is normal Swedish pine. This one is grown in the open air. And this one is grown in the greenhouse. Both are 1 year old.
After 1 or 2 years, the seedlings are transplanted. That is, they are replanted and can later be set out in the open air. If the reforestation measures have been successful, cleaning of the seedling stand can be begun after 10 years or so in order to guide the continued development of the stand of timber. In the case of natural regeneration, herbicides must sometimes be resorted to in order to lessen the competition from the deciduous trees. Half of Sweden's annual cut results from thinning operations, but efforts are currently being directed toward achieving a greater concentration of final felling. The work can thus be performed more cheaply because the wood is produced in greater concentrations. And the thinning operations, for the same reasons, are made more exhaustive and at longer intervals. To stimulate the growth of middle-aged stands, the forest is fertilized. The commonest method is to spread nitrogenous fertilizers from airplanes. Temporary landing fields are arranged in the midst of the forest regions by the closing off of ordinary roads. And an improvised landing strip like this can receive a greater flight traffic density than a metropolitan airport. Fertilizer is also frequently spread on the ground. The fertilizer is introduced into the soil about 20 years before the estimated final felling there is to take place. For economic reasons, it is primarily middle-aged stands of good quality and marketing potential that are fertilized. Through fertilizing, draining, and better selection of seedlings, among other things, it is estimated that the total forestry production in Sweden can be increased by as much as 50%. When it comes to the logging itself, increasing salaries have necessitated ever more extensive mechanization. Most of the timber is transported already bucked. To permit the tractors to move with their loads through the forest, the trees are felled directionally toward special strip roads established within the felling area inside the forest itself. Quite simply, this means that a series of parallel roads are laid out about 25 or so yards apart. The roads are identified with special markers. The one who locates the road spots the trees that are to be felled. The woodcutter fells the trees and sets aside the timber. The twigs and branches, though, remain lying in the road in order to increase its bearing capacity. This is what a completed strip road looks like. As a rule, no further work is expended on the strip road, but it is nevertheless so arranged that large off-road tractors can easily get through. If the planter and the cutter do their jobs well, the tractor driver has good working conditions. The large tractors feature all-wheel drive and hydraulic articulated frame steering. Even today, one can come across the occasional horse-drawn vehicle. But the tractors dominate, and the importance of horses is on the wane. In many places, tracked vehicles are preferred, especially where deep snow makes progress through the terrain especially difficult. Offloading is performed by grapple loaders at landings situated by waterways or truck roads. In final fellings of large dimensions in difficult terrain, the tree-length logging system is becoming increasingly important. The articulated frame steered skidders are four-wheel driven and capable of excellent off-road mobility. At the stump, the logger merely fells and branches the trees. The trunks are choked and winched into the tractor in large bundles. The trunks are usually bucked by power saw down at the truck road. This log has been given a mark, which indicates both its owner and its quality. Some companies load the trunks without bucking them and transport them to stationary facilities located in conjunction with sawmills. In principle, the facility can be operated by two men who check the trunks, decide how they shall be bucked, and then press the appropriate buttons to transfer the assignment to the machine's memory. After that, everything takes place automatically. Another part of the facility barks and chips the pulpwood and dispatches the chips in containers. A great number of new devices for the mechanization of bucking directly after off-road transport have come into being in Sweden. This is one of them, featuring a so-called flying bucker. Naturally, it would be valuable if the delimbing could be mechanized together with the bucking and sorting. In those facilities that are in operation, this work is done at the truck road, which is why the large skidders drag whole trees down to the landing. This facility is mobile and can be set up centrally in a logging area. Such a highly mechanized work site as this one makes a strange impression, located as it is in the midst of the forest. Here, too, sorting of the wood is performed mechanically. Another variation of the delimber on a desolate little field. It works with counter-rotating screws. A very important aspect of forestry today is personnel welfare. A part of this, for example, is modern warm huts on wheels for the lumberjacks. In these, they can prepare food and take a much-needed rest. The private homes of the lumberjacks are also of a high standard, but we shall be coming back to that later. Thanks to a high density of roads, a large portion of lumber shipments is by truck, and a transport system for trucks has been established in large parts of the country. As another example of this mobility and of the density of the road network, we cannot resist showing this transportation of the large slasher we saw recently. There's a tangible circus atmosphere about this procession. The caravan is now approaching the river valley. Down there we pass a tree-length logging crew. Even though we followed such logging operations earlier, we cannot resist showing the forestry tractor's attack on the almost vertical river banks. Like non-figurative paintings, the snowy logs lie waiting for the spring flood. Sweden is fortunate enough to have numerous rivers that can be used for floating the logs from the forest districts down to the industries on the coast. Power stations compete with logs for the water, and long flumes have been built to bypass the power stations. One result of this competition has been a reduction in the importance of floating, but for a good many years to come, the rivers will still supply a great deal of Sweden's long-distance wood transportation. And how romantically beautiful it is with the timber gliding by. Throughout the spring, the tractors wade along all the rivers with their timber, which will be sent as far as 150 miles, or perhaps further. The river driving profession has always been surrounded by romance. But today, when the patrol boat that booms in stray logs has a radio-controlled boat buddy at the other end of the boom, one gets perhaps more of a feeling of science fiction than of romance. Closer to the sea, lines begin to form. Now, current-producing devices and mechanical rollers must be resorted to in order to drive the timber farther down than sounds lower. By means of this highly automated installation, the timber is sorted according to owner and category. The sorting is done by women, who supply the computers with symbols designating owner and category. But that is also the last human contact. Highways, and above all, railways, as we said, nowadays are giving river driving strong competition. And it is only through high-degree mechanization and bold concepts that river driving can hold its lead in certain parts of northernmost Sweden. The railways and truck transport are being rationalized too, though. And on the railways and the newly expanded forest road networks, transport can be kept in operation the year around.
Well, as you know, the forest resources are of the utmost value for our national economy. Therefore, we very early started national forest inventories. The first one was carried out in the 20s. At that time, our survey crews started from the west and followed lines to the east of the country. And along those lines, they counted and measured all trees within 10 meters wide strips. Nowadays, we use circular sample plots instead, and we every year lay out about 25,000 sample plots systematically spread out over the country. Tal 30. Tal 30. Krongrens 12 meter. What about the results? Our total forest area is about 24 million of hectare, and the average volume per hectare is about 100 cubic meter. At the same time as the survey, we also carry out a special stump survey to get the annual cut. And the annual cut at present is about 16 million of cubic meters.
Both the punch card that was punched in the forest and the core sample taken from the trunk eventually become items for data processing. One can say that in practice, a balance sheet is worked up on Sweden's entire stand of timber every year.
Öppna griparen, stäng, sväng rotar, tillbaka.
Considerable skill is required of today's woodsman, and he acquires it in one of the many vocational forestry schools that are run with state funds.
använder vi oss av en 4 meter eller 3,99 meter lång stång. Ytan som vi får med en radie på 4 meter, den blir ungefär 50 kvadratmeter.
Ska du ta och börja och såga lite grann där?
It is not only youth who receive instruction in the vocational forestry schools. Courses are also held for older workers who are retrained so that they can adapt themselves to new, more sophisticated working methods. Because of his capability and skill, the forestry worker of today has a good social standing. He has his car and owns his own attractive home of good Swedish standard. We have attempted to portray a forestry having centuries-old tradition, a forestry that through rapid development is retaining its powers of competition. To ensure continued development, large sums are being invested in research. Advanced forestry machines are built and tested, such as this mobile delimber with its telescopic arm in practical operation. Biologists are striving to create forests capable of ever greater yield.
Phytotron is a building where we can simulate different climates and study the influences of them on the growing plants. We have 12 growth chambers, a freezing equipment and 2 greenhouses. In the greenhouses it is possible to replace the sunlight by artificial light. We are here mostly interested in studying pine and spruce. It is possible with all those equipments with variation in light and temperature to make the plants growing 3 to 4 times during a year.
Forest products are taken care of by the forest industry. To maintain our advanced position on the pulp and paper market, we have an extensive research activity. This is carried out in cooperation between the state and the industry, fundamentally centralized, and private applied research at the industries.
The work of the researchers guarantees that Swedish forestry will continue to occupy a position of prominence.